Paul and Alex, welcome back to Eager to Know. So you guys were the first people that I interviewed, although you were not the first episodes that went live. Although, Alex, yours was, I believe, the first episode that went live, but yours...
I was 5.
Yeah, you were number 5, but you were the first people I interviewed the first day. I think I did both of you.
It was fun.
So I didn't really know.
It was very fun.
I didn't really know what I was doing. But yeah, so I selected 3 people when I first started, and I wanted to get people of different personalities. So it was you two plus Robert. And Robert was supposed to be here, but he was not able to make it last minute. He had to back out. But anyhow, but you guys were the first 3 and different personalities. Obviously, you're in real estate. You are a conglomerate of
mostly architecture
of skills and activities.
Yes.
And then Robert is a painter. And really, what I was trying to do when that first started was just to try things out and to see how it went. And to do different styles of interviews. You know, with yours, Paul, I did a lot of listening. And then with yours, I was much more engaged. And I did that purposely because I just wanted to see how things went.
Find your own style.
But anyhow, but welcome back.
Well, thanks for having us.
Yeah, thanks.
You're very welcome. So what I thought we could do is I wanted to talk about things that have come up on the podcast, because I'm now up to episode 26, and
It's amazing.
yeah, and I see a lot of the same themes keep coming up. I'm not forcing it, but they just come up, and I would love to have you guys' opinion on these themes.
Love to
Of
offer
course.
it.
All right, so I think this one keeps coming up, and we did, and I believe we spoke about this. But that children are very creative, and when children are young, it's kind of a level playing field with creativity. Like usually they're all kind of creative, and then at some point, as the interview that I just did last week that hasn't aired yet, you snap out of it. For the most part, people stop being creative. And then with adults, I feel like people are struggling to get back to that creativity.
Oh, yeah. Do you want to go first?
Sure.
Fantastic.
In our episode, I think we spoke about the concept or the phenomenon of strong suits. And I think that's what creates all the different personalities that we experience every day as people develop something that they're really good at. And I think in grade school, what happens is people see that someone's better than them in something like art or sports, and then they decide to pull back. But before that, maybe in kindergarten, everybody thought they could do everything.
Yeah.
So this is a topic that I've talked to many times about with teachers and friends and people who are educators, and this is something that's always fascinated me. And I was in a psychology class in college years ago, and we were talking about this topic and why art is always being cut out of the school system, specifically public schools. And what happens so much, the reason why is, it's good to have creativity in children. That's how they logically problem solve. Or, let's paint a picture of a house. And when you paint a picture of the house, well, this is giving you an idea or a forte into becoming an architect, or let's build something so you can learn how to be an engineer, something like that. But what ends up happening over time, right around the ages of 8 to 10, you have all the creativity beaten out of you, because it's easier to control a non-creative child than it is a child whose mind is going 100 different directions. So in some respects, it's a way of keeping order and form and keeping the class moving forward, as well as teaching kids discipline. I think what ends up happening down the road when we start hitting our 20s and having our quarter-life crisis, I just had mine a couple of years ago. But I think what ends up happening is, you always hear this, you got to find your inner child. And one thing that we had talked about in our podcast that actually resonated with me so much was, how do you solve a problem creatively? And one of the things that I thought of that I do really well is find that inner child. How would 6-year-old Alex solve this problem? And sometimes it's just making a problem simple. Because I think as we as adults, as we move through life and gain life experiences, we complicate things,
Totally.
especially if you're college educated, because college teaches you how to think. It doesn't matter what you learn, but it teaches you how to organize your thoughts. And when you start to pack things into a box and you shove it away in your mind, and all of a sudden you're faced with some kind of a crisis or a problem at work or whatever the case may be, you then have to go find that box that you hid your creativity away, and you have to pull it out. And I think that's the biggest problem. And it's interesting that becomes a theme in your podcast here, is because it's so lost, and it's something that is so far gone now at our point in time that technology has disrupted that, where now we depend on an app for everything, or technology has made everything easier. I don't think we're really seeing the ingenuity or the advances or the innovation that we saw, 10 years ago during Steve Jobs' era. When he came up with the idea of Apple tripping balls on like some drug or something like that. And that's how he came up with the idea for Apple. And actually, Steve Jobs, where he got the idea for the operating system for Apple was a Native American art class.
Okay.
So that's something, there's creativity.
I thought he stole it from Xerox.
That too, but I heard something. I think that was part of it, but I think the actual design of it, the actual design and the layout of the operating system was from a Native American art class. And so, people, when you take art away from schools, getting back to that topic, when you start taking art away from schools, and that's what you're robbing kids of, is that ability to problem solve and that ability to think outside the box. I think we lose that.
I don't want to blame it on adults, but I'm going to.
Oh,
because if you think about it, there's so many things in movies and in television, and also within the people and the people that specifically have kids, where they say, well, don't be an artist because you won't make any money. Or are you sure you want to go into industrial design? Maybe you should just do engineering because it's going to pay well. And I think the adults instill this in the young people as well, because what do kids know? They don't know the difference between engineering and art. They just know that they're going to build a trebuchet or something and then launch something, or they're just interested in sparklers. But then all of a sudden the adults become the realists, and that's not altogether a bad thing, because we do have to, in some ways, have our feet on the ground, but to squash it or lessen the importance of tapping into all of your abilities and skills and desires happens, I think, from above, and then happens within the social structures of K through 12, because everyone wants to fit in.
But I think a lot of it has to do with, I know I was a creative little kid, and I used to do all of these, what are they called? Murals? Not murals, when it's like a big, big detailed
Collage?
Canvas. I don't know the word I'm looking for. But I used to do these very detailed drawings, and they were very elaborate and very detailed. And this was in elementary school, and I was like the artsy kid. And I remember they were so elaborate that the teacher would like pull them out and pull the class together and see what Ricky did. And I was like, whatever. But I remember at some point the boys were like, ugh, are you still doing those drawings? Like, they definitely started to look down on art as something, like, not something that a boy would do. Yeah. At least that was my experience. Yeah. I was like, all right, well, I'm not doing that. So I kind of shifted into other things. But that was
social acceptance.
Yeah. That was my, my experience. Yeah. And, and I did get picked on by other people too. I'm remembering, I remember writing books, and like these books with drawings. The book was called The Purple Orange, and it was about an orange, like the fruit, but he was purple. So he was different. And it was all about his
green eggs and ham.
Well, it was all about how he dealt with being different and how he was judged. And I can't believe I wrote this. It sounds kind of brilliant. I was like in third grade.
You should do paintings about it.
I know, but whatever. But I remember being made fun. I remember someone making fun of it and like, ugh, like, what are you doing? Like, you should be out playing baseball. You shouldn't be writing about a purple orange. So I think that's, and those weren't adults. Those were kids.
Yeah. I was just going to say, too, along with lines of what Paul just said earlier, I mean, you get, I think, societal norms and especially how fragile masculinity is, especially because I grew up in theater. So for me, wanting to do musicals or choir or dance or whatever the case may be, I enjoyed that.
Mm-hmm.
But constantly being picked on or bullied or, being made out to be the outsider because I was one of 8 boys in the entire drama department out of a drama department of 200 people.
Wow.
So I mean, it was just that kind of thing when people are they don't know how to handle it. I will also say that where I grew up was a very blue collar Midwestern town, so the access to a larger city that was a little more liberal or accepted being a homosexual or being involved where there is just more art, that I can't really blame them for that. Obviously ignorance isn't really something to be accepted, but I also don't fault them either because they just don't know any better.
Sure.
So I think that's part of it is they don't know how to handle what they don't know.
Yep, that makes sense to me.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's not, we shouldn't single art out.
No.
Because if you think about all the people that were kind of off to the side in K through 12, let's just say, for instance, I look at my brother, who I think I didn't get made fun of because he was the neighborhood bully.
Oh.
And I don't think anyone would mess with him.
Ooh, that's handy.
But in the
comes
meantime,
in very handy.
He learned welding, I think at age 14. And he basically he took the front of my bike off and welded it to his bike to make the chopper.
Ooh.
So in his own way, he was a maker, a creative type of person, very mechanically minded, and now he's a very successful electrician with his own company. And I think what happens is we end up kind of putting people into these categories of, well, you're not going into law, you're not going to be a doctor, so you've got to be this outsider. But then again, it's generalization.
Yep.
It's interesting what you say about your brother learning welding because my brother went to school for car customization and collision repair. So for him, same thing. I mean, ever since we were kids, he always played with his cars. He never wanted to go to a 4-year university. It wasn't his thing. And when he was telling people he was going to auto school, and it was a 1-year program, the incredibly disrespectful and just shaming that went on with him going to a technical school was absurd.
What?
So-
Really? I thought you said you were in a blue collar area.
Yeah, that's what it was. At my high school, especially where I went to school, we had more National Merit Scholars come out of my school than any of the other local high schools combined. And it was just this, it was really interesting. I guess, when people send their kids to my high school, because of the demographics of that school and the way it's set up for kids who don't exactly have a leg up in life. It makes it easier for them to get into college because, they can shine more. But also there's a lot of programs for them. And when he was going to a technical school, it's almost like, oh, no, don't do that anymore. Like that was the feeling that he got. It was just like, why? It was coming from teachers. His own teachers were saying, oh, why are you doing that?
Interesting.
Yeah, it was really interesting. The other thing I felt bad for him for is I went to a private school in a big city. And so
for college?
For college, I went to DePaul. That's what brought me to Chicago. And so he was always living in my shadows of, oh, well, Alex went to Chicago and he went to this big fancy school. Why aren't you doing the same thing? So I think he also had to deal with that a little bit too.
Okay.
But it was very interesting.
Yeah.
His whole creation was, painting cars and fixing stuff. That's what he enjoyed. And that's, I think a lot of times people downplay that.
So one thing that you bring up that kind of gets me into my next set of questions is around comparison.
Yeah.
And this has become a big deal, particularly with social media, where nowadays you have the ability to see what everyone wants you to see that they're doing and what they're up to.
Highlight reel.
But it's something that keeps coming up, and someone used the term the comparison spiral, and I'm definitely guilty of this.
Mm-hmm.
And it's about it's something that guests keep bringing up, where it is a challenge that you have to not fall into that. It's a
What
big
is the definition of that?
Basically being my definition is being distracted from yourself and your goals and what you're focused on by what other people are doing, and comparing what your value based on your perceived value of how people are presenting themselves. And this can be on social media. So this could be, if you're an artist, looking at the progress that other people have. I interviewed this guy, Tony Rossi, who was an actor. He's kind of just starting out as an actor, trying to get things moving. And it's a big issue because he also does coaching for actors. And it's a huge issue for them because they're looking at people that have been doing acting for the same amount of time that he's doing, and they're getting all of these roles, or they're in different places, and it can be very distracting.
I understand now comparison spiral. I think that it's all contextual. For instance, my brother, the one that I said is a bully, who, by the way, is not a bully now. After college, he became really cool. It's just that when we were younger kids, he'd be like that kid, He is very successful. He's an electrician, and he has his own business, and they do very well in the suburbs in Chicago. And once or twice, my parents compared me with him and my other siblings, and I think they just stopped because they realized it's like apples and oranges. And once you realize that even someone within the same field as you, like someone in architecture or furniture design, I could look at them and I could look at the depth of what they're doing at this moment and how much they've done so far and compare it to me, and it doesn't matter because I've done a whole different set of things aside from that.
Sure.
So it's all about, I think we should be applauding everybody for their achievements naturally because we bring everybody up together, and it's sort of a self-supporting creative community.
Yeah, I definitely support that.
Yeah. It's I have so much to say about this topic. So the way I had heard the spiral was a very good friend of mine said, you can't compare your film to someone else's highlight reel. Mm-hmm. And that's because people only put out on social media what they want you to see. And they only want to show you the good stuff. They only want to show you, what they're proud of. They don't show you the times they struggled, the times they were flat broke or cried themselves to sleep. I mean, they don't show any of that. Mm-hmm. And that's really where champions are made. And one thing that, especially in the gay community, that I personally struggle with is just the body image. It is so, especially being a millennial gay, it is hard.
Is this an Instagram thing?
The Instagram's part of Facebook. I mean, people constantly posting their meal plans, their dietary, their dietary supplements, their fitness. They're constantly working, the videos of them working out wherever it is. I mean, that might be the only time they went to the gym that week, but my God, it made it onto Facebook. It's especially when you're when you're under the age of 30, because 30 to gay men is you might as well be middle-aged once you cross the 30 threshold. There's so much pressure to look a certain way and act a certain way. And you can't be too gay. You can't be too femme. You can't be too this. You can't be too that. And it's incredibly difficult. And I got to the point now where I had to do two things. I had to shift my mindset, number one. And number two, I had to hit the unfollow button. Mm-hmm. There were some people I just had to unsubscribe from. And to the point that I was getting so lost in the pressure of having to look a certain way that I was completely losing sight of what it was I was doing. And, turning business goals or things I wanted to do into fitness goals. And not that it was really anything that was that important to me. I just had this pressure of, I'm supposed to look like this.
Yeah. So I know I brought up this topic and I led it with the idea of social media. Yeah. But I really think that before social media 50 years ago, I feel like people probably did the same thing.
They did.
Yeah. I feel like this is a human trait.
Oh, yeah.
But it's just sort of brought to a new level.
I think social media puts a magnifying glass
right. But
on
I think that people always would compare it. I mean, you live in a neighborhood and it's keep up with the Joneses.
Totally.
You're looking at what the car the neighbors have.
I think it's different. back
I
in
think
those
we
days.
can distill it to consumerism.
Totally.
If you look at what all the different topics of why people comparison spiral, so to speak, with someone else, it may have some, and I'm not an expert, but it may have something to do with they have that and I don't,
Mm-hmm.
or I have that and therefore I must be doing better.
Mm-hmm.
And the concept of that, which is either physical or non-physical, or they have the life of their dreams, or they have the physical object that make their life easier or make them look better or drive better or have better parties, so to speak, or it could be an American phenomenon that is because of our need to consume, but it could also just be a human trait where we are always in competition with another human for dominance in some way. I'm not sure.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's probably more of an American thing, and I think that's probably what has generated like our economy.
Yeah.
I didn't notice it in Denmark when I lived there.
Yeah.
And for instance, I was studying architecture and furniture design in Denmark, and I went to house parties of people that I knew there, Danish people, and very modest. They weren't trying to compare. They had really good quality design in life, but they only had one really great chair and a great sofa.
Right.
And I felt, well, my experience was that it was just like that weight was lifted off. When you went to the department store, there were around five coffee makers that you could buy. And it wasn't because they were forcing you to buy those. Those were the best designs. And people knew that they weren't going to buy crap design because they wanted to last a long time. And it was like that for everything.
Yeah.
Like they're just really good designers by nature. And I have a feeling their consumerism is based on quality over quantity. And their experience of life may be different than American experience. But, I didn't study these things.
Well, I think along with what you were saying about consumerism and especially in America, I think it also comes down to a human trait of just people wanting to be validated or to be seen and to be accepted as one of blank.
Sure.
Yeah, I especially Keeping Up with the Joneses, that's what that's all about.
Yeah.
Is just how do you see me the way I want you to see me? And does what I say matter? Do you hear me? Am I one of you? Because people want to belong. Look at the church system. That's what it is. People want to belong. So I think validation has a lot to do with that too.
I agree with you. I think validation and being seen and being validated.
Validated and valued.
Yes.
Yeah.
As someone worth something.
Totally.
So I did an interview with April from the Rialto Report. I don't know if you guys listened to that episode. So the Rialto Report is a podcast, and it's all about the adult film industry in New York of the 60s, 70s, and some of the 80s. And April is someone, I didn't mention this on the podcast, but we actually used to work together.
Excellent.
And something completely unrelated to porn. And she had mentioned years ago when we were working together that she was working on a documentary about the porn industry. And I thought that was amazing. And then we ended up connecting a few months ago and I interviewed her. But one of the things that came up was that when you were filming porn in the 60s and 70s, there were a lot of constraints that you had because they were just starting out. They didn't have a lot of money. They didn't have, they just didn't have the technology that we had. And one of the things that came up that I thought was so interesting was that being constrained really forced them to be creative. And I had never really thought about that, like constraints forcing creativity. Is that something that you had ever thought about?
From my end, when I taught architecture and design for 8 years, and that was the number one starting point for developing a unit to teach a unit of design or a concept or a principle. So basically, I would come up with something that the students had to design, but then I would remove options. And when I didn't do that, they went crazy with it. And they were so stressed out because they didn't even know how to funnel their ideas. But the minute I said, oh, and by the way, it has to be built on a post above the ground 10 feet, a building. And you can do X, Y, and Z. And then they would ask, can I break this rule? Can I do this? Can I do that? And I do believe that constraints is one of the, it's one of the most powerful ways to pull creativity out of any situation.
Interesting.
Yeah. I have a listing right now in the Gold Coast for $5 million, and talk about constraints. It's on the 1400 block of Astor Street, and across the street is the governor's house. And this particular property sits on a very rare 50-foot wide lot. Everything else on Astor Street's 25 feet. This is on a double lot. And the number one thing that we hear on showings is that the house needs too much work. It's a gut rehab. You have the original house that's the 25-foot facade, and then there was an addition that was put on in the 40s, where that was just a single-story addition. So it's almost like this L-shaped house from the street, but it's got a stunning courtyard in the back. And so you can't tear it down because it has, it's a part of a landmark district, so you can't get rid of that. You can't get rid of the original facade of the original house because it's part of the landmark designation. You can tear down the small piece, but the zoning restricts it to single family. It could be condos, but most likely it's only going to go as single family. So there's so many rules of that house.
Mm-hmm.
So what the seller did was she hired an architect to come in and build the house and reimagine it into what it could be based on the constraints.
Okay.
So we had plans drawn. We have marketed the bejesus out of it. And what's been really great about the showings is when people come through, I have everything on canvases. So people, when they walk in, they can see the floor plans
of what it's going to be.
What it's going to be. Not only that, but she took it a step further and went and got the plans approved by the Commission on Chicago Landmarks. So not only did she draw up the new house, she went and got it approved, which was a year-long process.
Okay, so that's a creative approach.
That is a creative approach to solving a very unique problem, because the number one issue that she heard with her previous brokers was it was too much work and they didn't want to go through the hassle of redesigning this house. Well, she took care of it for them. And the number one thing that people are nervous about renovating a house like that is the historic preservation piece of it. And that's one of the biggest hurdles. So working within the constraints of the land and the lot and the design and the facade and how it's all going to work, that's how we're solving that problem, is taking the guesswork out of it for the next buyer. It's been really fun.
And scale that down, because my current project is designing my next tiny home, the one that I'm going to build for myself and live in. And I literally have 7 feet 2 inches on the inside by 15 feet to put a whole house. And
I'm sorry, what? What?
So I'm going to live in 120 square feet on wheels.
You're going to live in this?
Wow.
Yeah. And to track back to this topic about constraints being, we'll call it the mother of creativity. Every day I have to take on a different, I don't have to, I take on a different element of the house to tighten it and to see how small can I make the bathroom without hitting my elbows taking a shower. Looking at products that do two things, like there's very elegant sinks that are combined with toilets.
I've seen that. I've heard of that.
Most of them are overseas products. But what's happening, my experience is, if I was given any size house to do, I could definitely design so many different options. But the fact that, the reason, by the way, it has to be on wheels is because it's the only way to legally own a tiny home. Well, there's more than one way, but right now the zoning laws don't allow you to put it on land with a foundation. That's why people put them on wheels. And so they're considered travel trailers.
Okay.
And you can live in them part-time as like a camper. But if you want to live in it full-time, you've got to go to an area that has been zoned for tiny homes, which there are very few in America. But for me, I really want to learn how to design these dwellings in the tightest possible space, but still make them appealing to a couple of different market groups. And the market groups are specific for me, like college students that can't afford the dorms. We've got underserved population, people that want to Airbnb or have a guest house for just like that weekend, or people that want a weekend getaway, or people like me that really do want to live full time in a really tiny home. So right now I'm in this very exciting process of sketching, 3D modeling, product research, like graph paper down to the inch to squeeze every single inch out of the inside. And I've managed to create a 4-foot wide kitchen, a bathroom that works, and a closet. And then the rest of it's a great room and a sleeping loft, and the option of pulling the sofa down to create a second sleeper or a full bed. But if without these constraints, I wouldn't even know where to start with. It's such a tiny space. I mean,
Right.
it's true.
Right.
Constraints are great.
I think too, people like the challenge. People like the challenge
Oh
of
yeah,
having
I love this.
I think we get so wrapped up in ambiguity that like, well, it could look this way or it could do that. All right, we could do this, or maybe we should try that. Whereas people like structure and they like having rules to abide by. And I think in your case, when you have, here's 120 square feet, try to squeeze a 1-bedroom house or 1-bedroom condo into 120 square feet.
That sounds like
And make it
That-
appealing to many people.
Yes.
That's the other part. This is
Right.
definitely appealing to me, but I have to design this in a way where people say, yeah, I could do it. Or that could be my weekend getaway home.
Yeah. Or in the other case there too is I think where people find the most joy is having less. You're instead of trying to add options or make it bigger, build this gargantuan McMansion, you actually find, oh, I don't need this giant jacuzzi tub.
Correct.
I don't need all this extra crap. I just enjoy having fewer options.
Yeah,
And-
this weekend I'm hosting a workshop on tiny home design, and the people that are coming specifically want to design their own tiny home. And the first thing we're talking about is this, downsize upgrade concept, where you really have to look at every object that you own and decide, is it worth having, or can one object serve as more than one thing? And how is this design perfected so that life could be better and simple? And that we're going to talk about that first, and then go into square footages and
Well, yeah, I mean, and just having less stuff. I mean,
Yeah.
when I lived in Boston,
back to consumerism.
well, when I lived in Boston, I lived in 650 square feet for 20 years in my brownstone, and you can't have a lot of stuff. You start getting, I had to go through everything every 6 months in purge, because when you're in that small of a space, it looks cluttered really quickly. So so I was trained living in that. Now my new place is twice this, whatever, it's 1,500 square feet. So I have plenty of space. And I am noticing that I am starting to collect things. So I have to be pretty vigilant about going through it. But my example of, constraints forcing creativity, mine came up last week. I took a painting class for 2 weeks, and it was a landscaping painting class. And I took all my paints and all my different colors, all the colors that the instructor had recommended. And I've never done landscape painting, and I've actually really never done painting outside. So this was all new to me. There was a lot about it that was very new. And the first couple of days I really struggled, and I was very overwhelmed. And what my instructor did is he constrained my colors. So he only gave me certain colors that I could use, and it completely made everything so much simpler. And it's kind of the similar idea. I was constrained as to what I could use for colors, and it made the quality of my output way better immediately. Yeah. And I never would have expected that. I would have thought more colors would have made a better painting, but it really didn't.
And we get overwhelmed by options. We get overwhelmed by decisions that you have to make. It's a lot easier to make, one decision of, do I use red or blue, versus I could use red and indigo and cranberry, whatever the case may be. I mean, you get overwhelmed in analysis paralysis. And you have to take away options. I find that when I'm working with home buyers, everyone wants to see, I've got this list of 22 homes I want to see. No, we're going to go look at your top 3. And those are the 3 that we're going to, and usually they buy one of those 3.
Yeah.
And we need to get rid of options and really sort through the market. to the point about you mentioned something about your painting class. It made me think. I did a show about 10 years ago that was filmed at a small little black box theater, and we had to bring this cartoon character to life. Basically, the show was called A Year with Frog and Toad, and it was a children's book that had been adapted to the stage. So we had 22 characters and 8 actors in an hour and 40 minutes. So how do you do that? How do you go through all those costume changes in a small little theater that seats about 50 people, keep kids entertained, and how do you create all these characters, costumes, set pieces that have to move around when you have no stage hands, and when you have like 0 square footage in backstage space? Mm-hmm. How do you solve that? And it was one of the most fun shows I ever worked on. I worked the light board and I was a stage manager for it. And what was so fun was the people that all worked on the show to keep it running smoothly. Okay. We doubled costumes. We doubled, where one costume, she was a frog in one case, and then she's one of the evil frogs. And then she would, the top part of her dress came down, and she had a belt around her, and the top part of her dress came down, and then she was like the princess or something like that. So, I mean, it was, constantly doubling up on things like that. And then we had the backstage laid out in a way that, certain props could get reused and not have to be fought for. So it also forces organization too. Yep. And creates efficiency. It was so much fun because we had to think of a way, how do we pull this off? Because normally people would have a budget 10 times ours. Right. We had $1,000 to work with.
Cool. But for those also out there that don't believe they have the creative agility to maneuver through and deal with constraints and create something worthwhile, I think the way to approach it is to treat everything as a game. Yeah. Because if you say to yourself, okay, a constraint is just a rule of the board game, and that's what you have to follow, and make it, and the result, I believe, is a little bit of fun in the process of getting your mind to expand and coming up with, oh, well, I could do that. Wow. And then what I believe can happen is with the creativity, the sparks that happen will turn into other sparks, and just this process becomes delightful.
So I interviewed David J. Collins, who was an author who wrote a book called Summerdale, which is a horror novel that took place right here in Andersonville. And how these things work is, I don't know what I'm going to call the episode until after we have the conversation, and then I got to see where it went and like what was the lesson that came out of it. And what ended up coming out of that was, a lot of people talk about writing a book. People are constantly talking about how they want to do this, and he did it. So I'm like, how come you did it? Like, what was different about you? And what he said was he had to change his what he was telling himself in his head. So what I ended up calling the episode was Telling Yourself Yes, because he was telling himself no. He was telling himself, I didn't go to school for writing. I don't have a master in fine arts. I don't have a publisher. I can't, and he said, I had to change the messages into yes. And he said that was the key. And I think that is really important, because what you believe about the world, about yourself, about your relationship to the world is so important. And I think the internal dialogue that's going in your head is really, really important.
Well, it's interesting that he brings up, there's just this world of no's that he goes through or had to change his mindset. First of all, mindset is like everything. Yep. That it's so key. And what's interesting too, that my big word of the year for 2019, every year I try to have a word to live by. And my word for 2019 on New Year's was intention. I wanted to live more intentionally. And what I found was that just by saying yes to things, or if I have an idea, writing it down, or immediately getting into some kind of action towards that idea, whatever it is, not only does it excite you, but it also builds your confidence too. And it forces you to step outside your comfort zone, and it forces you to move in that direction. And I think a lot of times we sit and have these ideas about a book or a play or, a piece of art, or in the business world, picking up the phone and calling somebody and asking for business. I mean, we always have those ideas, but we immediately build up the wall and say, no, we can't do it. And we build up excuses because we're afraid of rejection.
Mm-hmm.
And I think when you move in that direction, immediately take some kind of action, the wall comes down, because now you've made up the mind and you're intending to do something about it. That has made the world of difference for me this year, of just being more intentional about things.
So it sounds like it's not just about the mind, but it sounds like for you, it's about action.
Action. Once you get into action, and it's kind of like momentum. Once an object, was it Newton's law, or where once an object is in motion, it stays in motion until acted upon by an outside force, and that's exactly what it is. And once you get started on something, whether it's a project or laundry, even, it doesn't matter. Once you get started on something, you can't stop.
But did you have to change your mindset and how you view yourself as it relates to problems?
Absolutely. Because you have to, you are your first environment. And if you can't change that, you're just kind of sitting in a pool of shit on your own, and no one's going to help you get out of it. You have to do that for yourself. And I think your mindset has to be one of yes, but also one of acceptance. And you can't attach yourself to an outcome. You can't attach yourself to the outcome. Prime example, perfect example. I was at a bar with my friend Jake a couple weeks ago, and he's like, "Oh, that guy over there is really cute." I'm like, "Okay, great." And so I went up, and I don't care. And Jake, of course, is like holding on to me. Sorry, Paul, but he's like holding him. He's like, "No, come back." I was like, "What? What's gonna happen?" He says no, and they ended up going on a date. So I'm like, "See, that never would have happened if you wouldn't have found out, or at least go ask the question. No one's going to kill you because you went and asked them a question. Of course, unless you're in a different country, then that might be the case.
That's another whole podcast episode.
That's a whole other podcast. But what's the worst that's going to happen?
Rejection is the worst. Yeah.
Rejection's. What I've had to do this year is put myself in situations and positions where I was going to be rejected, and I knew I was going to be rejected. And running through rejection and actually actively seeking the rejection has helped me get over it.
Okay, I've never heard of that strategy before.
It actually has helped tremendously. Here's another fun story. I was at a McDonald's, very, very inebriated one night. And I asked if they could put ice cream on my Big Mac, just so I deliberately could hear them say no.
Okay.
And they're like, "No, sir, we don't do that."
But they would.
I was like, "Why not? Like, that sounds really tasty." "No, it doesn't." But they're just like, "No, sorry. Well, we can, but it's not going to be very good." I'm like, "Oh, well, I want to try it." Like, "No, sir, we can't," because like something about like the food. I don't know what it is about food prep or something, that they couldn't like screw up their kitchen, basically.
Okay.
Like, okay, fine. So if anything, that was like a small little micro step into getting them to just to understand and hear the word no.
Okay.
That was a fun little thing I did.
I think with the whole concept of expanding yourself, like this gentleman with writing the horror story in Andersonville, took place in Andersonville.
Yeah, it's called Summerdale, and
I'm interested in
it's really good.
I'm not sure about his experience, but when I've come up with something that I wanted to take on that wasn't my initial training or my initial expertise, expanding myself required two things. One, the willingness to play on the skinny branches, meaning if you fall, you might mess up, but at the same time, it's kind of exciting to be on the skinny branches. And then the other is the realization that you're not alone, and that not alone in this quest, but there are people that know stuff all around you, and you should be sharing your project with everyone, because when I've shared a project that I don't know a lot about X, right? But I shared with someone that's an expertise on X, and then they tell me about someone that I didn't even know about that is an expertise in something else that supported me in a new way that I didn't even know. So I think no person is an island when you're especially when you're exploring new territory of something worth doing. The writer was at his regular profession was writing, or was he
It
just a
was-
side project?
It was not, but it was. I actually don't. I don't recall. Yeah, it was not his main thing, but it was something that he had been doing since he was a kid, and he started working on this for his first novel, which was actually called Gay Bash, and he didn't have a publisher. He didn't have any of the things that someone who needed a book to get published. He didn't have any of those things. He did everything himself. So he had to learn how to self-publish. And he just said, I'm going to tell myself yes, and I'm going to do it all on my own. And it was an incredible story.
There was a project in particular that comes to mind that I had this idea, a story that I was developing for a kid's book. And I decided to go for it and write the story and illustrate the book. And for the longest time,
Don't steal my purple orange.
I won't
idea.
I'll promote it, or I'll sign something.
Because I haven't patented that.
You're
so
going to paint, your paintings are going to be the renderings for that.
Okay.
This particular book was something really close to my heart, and I wanted young people to hear the story about, and it's basically about what we're talking about. You could do anything you want as long as you have others. Like, that's what the story is about. I won't go into the detail of the entire story, even though I love this story. But I will say that what I learned in the process, outside of actually illustrating and writing the story, is I involved other people, and they all contributed something that I had no idea needed to be in the story. And by the end, when I got to the rough draft of having it printed, I took it to a professional children's book author, and she went through it and marked it up, and she told me, these are the rules for kids' books.
Okay.
And this is the truth about kids' books. Like, on the shelf, most only last 6 months in the stores, and then they're done, unless it's a classic. I'm like, oh, well, that's not why I'm doing this. I want it to be forever. In the kids' book, you have to have 32 pages, and the story arch has to be at page 16 and a double spread. In a kid's book, you don't want to preach. You don't want to. And I'm thinking, oh my gosh, wow, this is just. And after all this work, I learned that this would fail in the kids' book industry, even though I loved the story and I illustrated it 100%. And the story, when I read it to myself or others, or even kids, they really got excited about these characters. So it's like playing on the skinny branches. I put myself out there, and when I fell, so to speak, I landed in a pillow and decided that I need to make it a full-length movie. Because the story itself was not really meant to be a book. It was meant to be an animated
Something bigger.
movie.
Yeah.
Okay.
So that's now the new project. Now
Oh.
it's in its infant stages, but like, it's exciting to know that it's okay to play on these skinny branches,
Mhm.
because you could have something even bigger when you pass that horizon.
Yeah. One of the things that you had mentioned that also keeps coming up is staying connected to others in whatever you do, others that are doing the similar thing as you.
Or not similar.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I know for me in particular, when I moved here, I moved to Chicago from Boston. I didn't really know that many people. So I was establishing myself as an artist. I needed to meet people that were artists really quickly, just because, I work alone painting. So I need to be connected with other people. So that was that was really important. And I think I always kind of knew that was important, but that was a situation where it kind of became very obvious very quickly. But that keeps coming up with people who are successful or are just moving forward in their creative endeavors, is that they always have they stay connected with others that are doing the same thing.
Mm-hmm.
This is easy in Chicago also because the creative community is tight. I've experienced a lot of other people, whether they do the same thing as me or as they do the other things, is that we all kind of like find out what we're doing and support each other with work that is supporting their endeavors, or they find out about a gallery or project. And so I think being in a city is great. First of all, in any city, but in this city in particular, my experience is that people really know each other in this community.
Yeah, and I think because Chicago is so huge, it has so many people that live here. You can find anyone that has the same interest as you, And also because it's in the Midwest, people are very open to making connections to other people, unlike other places. So I think it's fairly
It's
easy.
friendly.
It's really friendly. It's really easy to make connections, and you can always find, I think, probably the most obscure interest that you have. There's tons of people in Chicago that probably have the same interest.
Well, the other thing too, especially in real estate in particular, but also I think in the business world too, there's a mindset, not even a mindset, but there's definitely a feeling of keep your friends closer, your enemies closer, because you are in competition with each other too. And art's a little bit different because that's more of a creative approach, whereas from a business perspective, I'm constantly up against, that agent or that brokerage, and I need to know what my value proposition is because we're all competing for a certain piece of business.
Do you find that you're always up against the same people?
There's two agents in particular I'm always up against, and that's because at our core, we have very similar groups of people that we're connected to or know because of our similar interests.
Okay.
So when I'm going up against, I won't name names, but there's one agent, whenever I'm listing a historical home, I'm always competing against him. If I am competing for a listing in the South Loop or Museum Park, where about a third of my business is, there's two agents there that I'm always up against.
So I'm getting a little bit into about your business.
Yeah.
So you're trying to get the listing.
Correct.
So it's not about selling the home. It's about getting the people to go. You're going up
how
against.
How are they going to choose me, and how am I going to sell it? So, I mean, there's, I have to be able to sell them on why I'm the best choice or the best option or what my plan is to sell their home.
Gotcha.
So that's where it gets to be a little more difficult is, yes, we're friends. Yes, we need to learn and feed off of each other because I just had lunch today with one of my idols in the real estate industry because we learn from each other. You learn from what works and what doesn't. And I come from a mindset of abundance. There's plenty of business out there for everybody. And I don't think it's dog eat dog. It doesn't have to be cutthroat. It doesn't have to be that way. Because there are some clients that, frankly, I just don't want to work with. And there are some people that are going to be better fits for others than me. And there's going to be people who are going to be a better fit for me than other agents. So, there's definitely that part of it. And yet it is a sales industry. We do have to, we have to compete. So I think there's definitely something to be said for, it's like a tug of war. You have to learn from each other, but you also have to compete against each other.
And I'm not sure if this is more or less the opposite of what's happening in the creative realm. But in my experience with furniture design in particular, there's people that approach me that want something more traditional or Victorian. They have a specific style in mind that they want. And it's not my thing to do historic restoration or design something new based on historic ideas, except modernism and industrial and reclaimed furniture. So I naturally have a group of other people that I'll send them to say, it would be perfect for this person. And inevitably that person will throw me back something months later that's definitely in my wheelhouse or my interest. And I think I can see that in real estate it would be very different because you are competing. You're both doing the same thing, But in furniture design, it's been helpful and profitable for me to spread the wealth and share. And not take everything on just for the buck, but take things on that I really would love doing, and then share with others what they would like doing.
Cool. Yeah. Work that's fun gets done. I mean, that's when you enjoy what you do, and you have if you have a project you like working on, you're going to do it, and you're going to enjoy doing it, and it shines through. And if anything, it's gratification. It's the client or the customer, they always appreciate the end product, but really the person who gets the most gratification is you, because you put a lot of pride into that. When you have pride in your work, it just makes for a much more enjoyable life.
And getting paid.
Yeah.
If you don't get paid for something you do, it feels awful. And a lot of creative people I know will take a hit just to take on a project that they really love. And sometimes the person on the other end that's not in the creative field, but you get to have fun building this. And it's funny because what they don't realize is that making things and bringing things to reality from concept requires diligence. It requires a lot of front work. It requires expertise of
And
materials and
those
tools.
things are valuable.
And they
Dedication,
they should be
discipline.
valued like any other person in
course.
any other profession. And I'm not. I hope that someday. And I have heard that the commodity of the future is creativity, and the makers in the future. There's just a shortage of people to make things. So I believe that this is going to be respected a lot in the future, because we're going to need to build and make new things as buildings fall apart or objects need to get designed.
Well, I think a part of that, Paul, is because we live in a society where everyone is so dependent on technology that eventually technology can only solve so many problems. And the only way you're going to be able to solve problems, whether they be medical or art or whatever, I mean, name the industry, eventually you're going to get to a point where, oh crap, a computer's not going to fix this problem. Or it's become so mass produced that, now you have to find something of quality rather than of quantity.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's where creativity will I couldn't agree with you more. I think creativity is going to have its moment to shine.
Yeah,
And
it is
that's-
now. I mean,
yeah,
it's
it is
already
now.
emerged as
Yeah.
a commodity.
Mm-hmm.
So, Paul, I know you have something happening at the studio in Pilsen, which, oh, by the way, I'm going to be there on Saturday painting with David.
You are?
I am. I'm going to be there. David,
I'm going to be there Saturday too.
Yay! It's going to be like old times. So, what's
Yeah.
going on in October there?
Well, twice a year we have a show, which is basically converting the studio into more or less a gallery space, and a couple hundred people show up to see our latest and greatest work. And I am going to build a full-scale cardboard mock-up of my tiny home that you can walk in and tour, so I can prove that 120 square feet is definitely livable. It's going to be made of cardboard, but you'll get it. There'll be windows cut out of the cardboard, and there'll be appliances cut out of cardboard. And I think maybe we could post, it's the second Friday of October, and we can maybe post the information on the podcast.
Yeah, definitely. I'll
Yeah.
put it at the so you can see
Everyone's
that.
welcome.
If you go to rickyartist.com, you'll be able to see all the information.
I'm also going to be unveiling a chandelier made of plastic bread clips on that show too.
What?
You have to see it to believe
I need to
it.
come see this.
Wait, have you ever?
I have to see it to believe it, because it's still in my head.
I never went to your studio in Pilsen.
It's awesome.
Yeah, I've only been
It's
to the
really
one
cool.
up here
It's
in Rogers Park.
really, really.
Is that in an old Ford factory?
It's an
Yeah.
old Model T factory.
That's right,
The
that's
best
right.
part of the building is the elevator.
Yeah.
The
So they used to
elevator,
carry cars,
it's
right?
big
Too.
enough to
Yeah.
carry 2 cars, and it's an industrial elevator. So you get in and you can look all the way up. What is it, 6 stories?
Oh, wow.
Yeah, roughly.
It's awesome.
Yeah, it's a great
That
building.
sounds great.
So,
Yeah, everyone's invited. We'll make sure. But I'm going to unveil the chandelier too.
You're always up to. How is everything going with your your map of Chicago?
The mural?
Yeah.
Oh, it's great. In the lobby of the Doubletree Hotel downtown on Ohio and Fairbanks, basically Mag Mile, the Doubletree Hotel hired me to, it was the art company that the Doubletree hired to find the art for their lobby. And I was one of the artists to do an assemblage piece. And they asked me to do an abstract aerial view of downtown Chicago, like one I've done before for another lobby in a condo in Logan Square. And I installed it finished it in January or in December. And then they opened up the hotel remodel of the lobby, I think about a month later, but it's been going really well.
Oh.
I check in on it to make sure that
So
it's okay.
I've only seen it when it was under construction in the studio.
Oh,
And it was
you've got
Alex. It was awesome.
What?
So
It's
you have to
for-
stop. You're down
it's-
that area all the time for
Oh,
work.
yeah.
So you got to stop in and check
Oh
it
my
out.
It's a
gosh,
wall.
yes.
It's a wall assemblage piece. It's not a mural. It's not flat, but it's an assemblage, as they say in the art community. But it's an assembly of reclaimed wood blocks, metals, and laser cut flat pieces, and some other things, some acrylic as well, to represent the different elements of downtown. And I designed it based on a map of Chicago and its aerial view. And it can't come out it can only come out 4 inches from the wall because of ADA requirements. You can't have people hitting it. But so far, everyone loves it in the hotel, and it's been up, and it's 4 foot by 9 foot, very, very heavy. And it took me, hundreds of hours to make. Didn't get paid enough, but that's okay. It's a pretty cool project. I didn't know how long it would take, so I was like, sure, I'll do it.
All right.
And then I did it, and I was like, yeah, that was 3 all-nighters, wasn't it? Yeah, in my delirium the next day after installing it. But it's a fun project.
Wow. That's so cool. I need to go check that out.
Yeah, it's on their website, I think, too.
Oh, okay.
That's very cool.
In person's way better.
Well, thank you, Paul. Thank you, Alex. This
Thank
was
you.
great,
Thank you
and
for
I would
having
love
us.
for you guys to come back.
I
And
would love.
I think when
I'd
I do
come
it,
back anytime.
so we'll do I'll do another 20 because I'm at like episode 25-ish. So we'll do another 25 episodes and see what
I
comes
love
up.
Yay!
And you guys can come and
well,
we'll
yeah,
talk about
50
it.
would be great because I was episode 5. So.
All right, thank you guys.
Thank you,
you.
Rick.